I share many similarities with the positions that the chairwoman has stated today and in the past. And I do think whilst all the situations are obviously different, I do think there are similarities in Iran and North Korea and Cuba and what's happening in Gaza. Yes, in all of those situations, we support the Cuban people, we support the Iranian people, we support the people of North Korea. We support people who are oppressed everywhere. But the United States has to have policies against those regimes. Of course, when you have opportunities to try to pivot and make progress, we should take advantage of those in all instances. But I'm not convinced that the Cuban regime has afforded those opportunities. I just don't think we're there. And so, look, we got to do everything we can to lessen humanitarian crisis in Cuba, just like we have to try to lessen the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But that doesn't mean that we should change our policies with the dictators and the totalitarian regimes that control these areas. And so, I agree with a lot of my colleagues across the aisle here on their policies, but I would remind them to talk to their colleagues that don't necessarily serve on foreign affairs, but to talk to their Republican colleagues that are in the House and don't want to help give Ukraine money. Because it's the very same logic here with what Russia is doing in Ukraine and the totalitarian regime that Putin is in Russia. And so these are all, different sides of the coin, but they share similarities. And so while we should be strong and unified where we can when it comes to Cuba, I ask my colleagues on this committee and on foreign affairs to talk to their Republican colleagues right now that are holding up support for money for Ukraine. I want to talk about China, and I want to get to a couple questions. Mr. Jacobson, this is for you. So, many of my colleagues on the Democratic side, the Republican side, share concerns about China's growing influence. It's why we set up the China Select Committee. We're seeing everywhere, and I saw this on my trip with Speaker McCarthy when we went around the globe. Everywhere the United States creating a vacuum, China is filling it, right? Which is why the isolationist policies, again, of some of my colleagues are so dangerous, because as we retract, China comes in. We're seeing their influence in Latin America and Africa and the Caribbean. Last summer, Secretary Blinken expressed his deep concerns about China's efforts and increased intelligence and military activities in Cuba. In this time, some of those concerns have been expressed. What is your assessment of China's economic, diplomatic, and military presence in Cuba?
Thank you, Congressman. So we've advised Cuba on several levels that it's not in its interest to collaborate with the PRC on problematic activity. PRC assistance incurs long-term and non-transparent steep costs for countries globally, and Cuba is no different. You mentioned the comments that Secretary Blinken made in his June 20th statement on monitoring this closely and protecting our homeland and our interests here. We assess that our diplomatic outreach on this topic has slowed down the PRC's efforts to project and sustain its military power in Cuba and around the world. And we'll continue to use all potential tools in the administration's toolkit, including targeted sanctions, as appropriate to address these challenges. We remain confident that we can meet all of our security commitments at home and in the region. And I would note that efforts like supporting the Cuban private sector are precisely the kind of things that we can do to curb further Chinese influence. We want to be the ones in there influencing the private sector rather than the PRC or Russia.
In your opinion, how, or if at all, has the U.S. adversaries, in addition to China, sought to take advantage of Cuba's economic situation to pursue maybe their own strategic priorities? We see China doing that, if you want to elaborate, obviously, but who else in addition? Russia, obviously.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. Russia's obviously another key example, and we remain concerned about Russia's activities in Cuba, and we continue to take steps to counter it. And Russia and Cuba, they frequently announce increased ties or trade deals. We seldom see much follow-through from the Russian government, which is no surprise. But we know that Russia wants a more stable authoritarian regime. And it's important for us that we not cede space to Russia in the development of Cuba's nascent private sector. So that's why we feel like our engagement in this space is important. And to us, it remains the best way to counter Russia's malign economic influence.
And just in a hypothetical, just so we can kind of, pique our interest. I mean, is there any evidence that if the United States were to change its posture at all, that the regime would turn away from China and Russia? I haven't seen it. I'm just curious if you have.
I certainly think when we're dealing with these independent entrepreneurs, they would benefit more from us, from the United States government, than from PRC and Russia officials. So I think that would be one key example where we can have influence.
Yeah, because I heard that as I travel the globe, that everyone would much rather do business with us than China or Russia. But I also don't see them retracting from China and Russia and the deals that they are making. And I'm seeing that from not just some of the countries I named earlier, even in Europe, quite frankly, with the deal we saw that Italy made. They're not getting out of that deal so quickly. So it's deeply concerning. I'll just wrap up with this. I just want to make a suggestion to the majority. Listen, there are vast differences that we have, whether it's on this issue or other foreign policy issues. Lord knows I have differences with my folks in my own party, like when it comes to Israel. But I think we should always allow members, when they try to wave on to committee, even when we disagree and we think they're wrong, we should always allow them to make their point and then beat them in the debate and point out while they're wrong. With that, I yield back. Thank you.